So we're up here at Auto Classico. It's a Saturday. Mark, who's painting the car,
hello.
He's Mike Mercer's son. He's been painting cars for quite a few years. He's taken all that horrible masking tape off, and this car actually already looks a million times better. So you've actually started on the bonnet.
Yeah, we found out the bonnet. It's now in the booth in primer.
So what was the state of the bonnet like?
It was actually good. It was the paint
not too much filling and stuff?
The paint was dead, so we had to take it all off.
Yeah.
I never knew they were aluminium either.
Are they
so light?
Is that aluminium?
Yeah,
I never knew that either.
Light. You'd be able to lift that on it. That's crazy light. Has a few dents in it, but...
So is this an oven in here, or is this just dust-free?
No, this is the oven. Yeah, this is the oven.
And
yeah.
what's it primed with? Did they use special
etch primer first?
Etch primer. Do you have to do anything special because it's aluminium?
Just to make sure you etch primer it, basically. Etch primer and then a 2-pack primer.
And you've actually remembered to do the grill as well?
Yeah, I remember doing the grill and the hinges. I cleaned the springs off.
Brilliant.
And
cool. So
paint's here now.
How long does it take to sort of cure, and will you start?
You bake it, and you've got to bake it for at least 4 or 5 hours, and then you can paint it really.
Cool. So will you start next week?
Yeah, Monday I'll paint it.
Monday. So we might get the car back next week.
We'll get the car back next week.
Whoa, exciting!
Definitely.
Right. Cheers, Mark. I'll let you get on. So when we drove over here, there was the most terrible knocking every time we went over a bump. What you found out what that was?
Yeah, we found out it was. Attached at the top.
Yeah, that bump knocking. I thought it was the fuel lines and the brake lines that I haven't attached. So yeah,
we did. It was exhaust knocking, but no.
Because I haven't actually attached the exhaust or welded it up here because this car was such a mishmash of parts. Oh well, at least we know the answer to that. So they've painted our bonnet and got it on. Did you have any problems getting it on?
No, it went on all right.
One of the hinges you mentioned was bent.
Yeah.
So you managed to straighten it without cracking the paint?
Yes. Thankfully.
Right, it looks lovely. You've polished all this as well. The paint match looks pretty good, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's not bad. It's good. It's a lot better than we thought.
Yeah, no, reds are difficult, aren't they? That looks great. All I need to do now is fix the shock absorbers before I drive home, and we'll be laughing. So the springs and hinges have been painted. We will get some new clips at some stage, but we're pretty much finished inside there. We've still got to do all the vacuum lines, etc. And ideally, whoever's done this car, they've put these panels in without painting them. Originally, these would have been red and the insides would be red, but I actually quite like it black, so I'll probably just paint that black myself. And of course, we've still got to put the grills on. How many coats of paint do you put on when you paint the bonnet? One coat and think they'll never notice?
I think you put 3 coats of base coat on it and 2 coats of lacquer.
Nice one. It looks amazing. Right, well, I'll see you probably tomorrow or a few days' time and take this car, see if it starts and drive it out of your hair, as they say. Brilliant. We're just on our way back from having the bonnet painted. I can see that either the fuel gauge, there's no fuel in this car, or more likely the fuel sender's not working. The temperature gauge works fine, the oil pressure gauge works fine as well. Wow, we made it back. 15 kilometers there, 15 kilometers back. We've had the bonnet painted. I have to say they've done a really nice job. Having had this bonnet repainted, it was my plan today to come in and fit the bonnet chrome grille here and the star, but I've run into a few issues and learnt some things about the R107 that I never knew. When we first test fitted the springs and the bonnet on this car, the first time we released the bonnet, this bonnet shot up with speed. And I remember thinking, gosh, those springs are strong. And I think I've now worked out the reason why. If you look back at the beginning of this video, in the paint shop, the guy who was painting it remarked that he hadn't realized that these bonnets were aluminium. And I think on later SLs, after about 75, the bonnets were indeed aluminium, but on earlier cars, these bonnets were steel, and therefore they were much heavier, and therefore they needed much stronger springs. So for example, if you come over here and look at this 1974 450 SL, our parts car, you can see how the bonnet is rusted here. And that makes me think that this bonnet here was actually steel. The other thing that's worth noting, which I've mentioned before, is that the star on the early Mercedes was made out of cast metal or cast alloy and weighs a ton, whereas on the later Mercedes, the Star is basically plastic and is much, much lighter. So I think that explains why the springs on an earlier Mercedes might be much, much stronger than on a later Mercedes. But there is another difference between these bonnets. When I came to fit the bonnet grille that I assumed was the right one for the car because of this red paint here, it didn't fit properly, and on closer inspection both sides are slightly dented in just here and here, and I assumed that that was the reason it didn't fit. Now luckily we have a spare bumper chrome surround there which fits perfectly, but strangely enough this bonnet surround here, which doesn't fit on that aluminium bonnet, you can see that this here is knocking into the paintwork and there's a gap all the way along the top. But just look what happens when we take this bonnet chrome here and fit it to our gold parts car. Will you look at this? This fits absolutely perfect. There's no gap at all, and the edges here, it fits absolutely perfectly. So I think that the shape of the old bonnets on 1975 and earlier cars is actually slightly different to the shape of the new bonnets. The reason that all of that is important, or maybe important, is if you happen to have an older car or a newer car and you have a crash and you need a new bonnet for it, to make sure that you actually source the correct bonnet and the correct bonnet grille and maybe even the correct springs. Here's another problem that we ran into. It's taken me ages to figure out why the chrome on this side here does not sit flush. It's at an angle, and it transpires that this car was supplied with two right-hand grills and not one right hand and one left hand, and these bits of chrome here are actually slightly different for the right and the left hand, so we have to procure a right hand grille for this car. Luckily they're still available from the SL shop. They're not that expensive, they're about £30. I've actually bought the pair from somebody, a subscriber actually, on eBay, because what somebody's tried to do in the past is paint this here. And if you are going to paint plastic, it's really important that you actually use the correct plastic primer, because otherwise what happens is this just all flakes off. And if you want to bring this back to life, as I mentioned in the previous video, the way to do it is just to polish it with something like Black in a Flash turtle wax, and that'll make it come up really nicely. These bonnet chrome grills here are a very expensive part. If you needed to get one of these from Mercedes, it will cost you over £500 just for the chrome surround. And this one here is in excellent condition, at least on the surface it's in excellent condition. But if you own one of these cars, or you've just bought one of these cars, I would urge you or advise you to take a minute just to take off the 6 screws that hold on this bonnet chrome, and just to take a look at the back of the chrome, because these little signs of rust here is the bottom end of this boot chrome. As I say, if you leave it like that, that will eventually bubble through and this bit of chrome will become ruined. It's much easier to address this early on. Simply sand this back, spray it with rust encapsulator, and that will be good for another 50 years. While you are at it, my advice would also be to replace all the fittings with stainless steel, because these fittings are prone to rust. For example, the ones that actually hold the whole grille to the bonnet are supposed to screw into little brass knurls, and you'll often find that when you take it off, the brass knurl comes out with it, or you'll snap the screws in there like that. So by actually replacing them with stainless steel, you will avoid that happening in the future. Similarly, the little rubber fittings here, which we've had to transplant from the other chrome, are held on with screws, and if you can get them out, take them out and replace them with stainless steel screws. So we are going to sand the inside of this, spray it with rust encapsulator. We've ordered a couple of these grills here from eBay. They won't turn up till next week. By then the paint will be dry, so that should be us done on the bonnet grill. The other thing I've noticed is that whoever took this car to pieces drilled out the rivets that hold on these scuttle plates, but they used a very large drill bit, so that the screws I would normally use to put these back in are too small, so we need to order some of those. We just test fitted this side here. We will be replacing this, and we need to tap a couple of holes in the star because the screws don't go in smoothly. And you can see on the inside here how this chrome is held on with just those 3 screws there. And then there's one here holding the star. We need to re-tap that hole and probably take this here off and paint it gold. I'm going to leave this video here. Next week we'll pop down to the SL shop and pick up our bonnet installation and also some rubbers and a few other bits and pieces that are quite difficult to get hold of. I do plan to do a more comprehensive video on where to get parts for your Mercedes cheaply, and that's not the same as getting cheap parts. That's paramount to saying where you can get good quality parts for a fraction of the cost. For example, we have just had a parcel from Euro arrive from America, and that contains things like the blower motor, the cover, various vacuum lines, etc. And if you know where to shop for parts as and when you need them, you can save yourself an absolute fortune. So in a future video I will point out some of these sources that we've used for this restoration and others.